We're at the 7th Conference on Future Energy, and our next speakers are representing Marcus Reid, who was born in Cape Town, South Africa, living in Germany. Since '98, he engaged in research of asymmetric electromagnetic systems, and he also studied privately vacuum energy physics under nuclear physicist Tom Bearden. So speaking on the topic of the Reid crystal cell vacuum energy electron pump, please welcome Rolland Gregg and Marc Cuthbert.
Thank you, sir. Well, before we start, we just want to express gratitude on our behalf and the whole of our community who's in the field of developing zero-point sustainable technologies. You guys here, I hope, are 100% committed, as we are, to bringing these sustainable technologies to the forefront of our society and get us out of this slavery of power supply and generation. So thank you all.
Definitely want to echo that. There's a lot of people that we're standing on their shoulders right now, and we would not be able to accomplish what we have unless people before us have spent many, many, many millions of hours theorizing, experimenting, and asking deep questions like you guys are asking great questions today. We wanted to give you some context today on who we are in relation to Marcus Reid and what we do and why we're up here and all that kind of stuff. So Discover Get, we'll talk about that. Global Emergent Technologies is our clean technology incubator up in Seattle that Mark and I are partners in. Basically, that's discoverget.com. These are the 4 equal partners in our incubator. It's Paul Reynolds, Rolland Gregg, myself, Declan Owens, and Marc Cuthbert. And together, we develop technologies to empower communities with affordable and sustainable water, food, shelter, health, waste, and energy solutions. Energy truly is, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs for how we support our reality, energy is the key thing to figure out. So that's what we focus a lot of our time, energy, and money on figuring out. To that point, we'll give a little small intro of what our lab looks like, what we do in our lab, and how these things are made right here. So. Basically, this is us in the lab making the crystal cells. Marcus Reid in Seattle. It's Marcus and Mark, and myself. Self-charging batteries. That's the first stage of the crystal that we make. It takes very precise stirring, heating, cooling.
Once the relationship began, the first thing we wanted to do, of course, was validate Marcus's findings and reproduce the technology.
So we did, and the last year, I've carried this around every single place that I go. I sleep with it, I walk with it, I do everything. I witness it, I see the light. Every morning I wake up, it's still on, and it blows my mind. That was the first crystal cell Marcus made for us over a year ago. It's showing 1.6 volts.
Synchronistically, it happened to be the very day that I arrived in Seattle, and it arrived too.
Yeah, Mark joined us about a year and a half ago.
A little bit of fun, but it gives you a view.
Welcome to Quantum Power, Inc. This is our company in Seattle. We have a sister lab with Marcus in Germany. So together we validate each other's work, and we work to commercialize the technology that Marcus has made. Just a little bit more. This is a quote. Mark, if you want to read that, if you can, or actually, I'll read it from here. Basically, this is a quote by Dr. Hans Weber. He's a theoretical nuclear particle physicist. He actually wrote a paper on isothermal calorimetry, which is made it to the European University Papers, which is very interesting because he's an expert on how to measure energy and really, where the energy is coming from, which is the key. So he's cut them apart and measured them over years, dead shorted them over years, and they come back. So he says, the crystal cell developed by Marcus Reid in Munich is a fundamentally new way of electricity generation with the potential to not only replace chemical batteries and solar cells, but after scale up, even fossil and nuclear fueled power plants, as well as hydropower stations. Optimization and scale-up of the crystal cells will be possible to units of several kilowatts for peripheral power supplies, flats, and houses. That's Dr. Hans Weber. So there's been a number of people, and Marcus himself is very, very detail-oriented when he does not want to, he wanted to make sure that this wasn't chemical, that this wasn't thermal, or harnessing the radio waves or TV waves or any other kind of RF. So he's done a lot of experimentation and put this in the hands of qualified people. So just some aspects of characteristics. It's a new clean energy source, a self-recharging battery. Battery is the wrong word, but we're using it in context of where we've come from. We need to develop new vocabulary. No pollution, consumes no fuel, university tested, UW, UCLA, University of Augsburg. Working prototypes, third-party validated, IP patented and commercial ready. Power cell technology scalable to many applications. So,
an interesting component there that you see, UW, one of their PhD students took one of our cells into the lab and did a whole number of tests on it, and he was so impressed, chopped it up, spliced it, and reproduced the performance. And he couldn't find out how it worked, he couldn't understand how it worked, even with his background and master's degree in quantum dot technology. And he came to us completely befuddled, but said, I've sold all my shares and everything else in America, and I want to invest in you guys. And he was our very first investor.
We weren't even taking investment at that point, but we did because it was such a great story of him coming back. We wanted to see if the critic, the mainstream critic, would poke holes in it, and he came back with his own, So what is the crystal cell? How does it work?
Well, it's based on a water pump and quantum dot oscillation that creates a charge separation device. Basically, it's a steady electron pump. It manifests through a new theoretical approach that Marcus has developed himself. And the process derives charge separation through coherent water molecule oscillations in nanostructures embedded between two diodes. The so-called crystal cell experiment is a capacitor-like device that has generated a direct electric current since 1999 under permanent load. The cell is made up of water containing quasi-crystalline silicate that's embedded between two dissimilar surfaces. Measurement data suggests that the clusters of water molecules that are within the silicate nanostructures move into a self-sustained and self-adjusted coherent oscillation, which energizes the electrons. The dissimilar surfaces then rectify the current, and the cell generates a broadband radio signal on the voltage measured within a Faraday cage. Analysis of the signal does demonstrate a relationship between the oscillations that come from within the silicate and the generated current.
It's very interesting. Listening to the last presentation, you're talking about the cavities. It's one of the things that within the structure, there are nanocavities in there that we theorize there is a self-oscillation of the water molecule. So the cavity science you're talking about is very interesting to us. So let's hear from the inventor, Marcus himself, since he could not make it today.
In quantum electrodynamics theory, the virtual particle transmits and creates the electromagnetic interaction. This is a scientific fact and is experimentally proven. So these virtual particles play a fundamental role in every conventional electric system that we use. If we look, for example, at the light that comes from a torch, the photons that are emitted from that torch exist in space as a virtual particle. The interesting thing about these virtual particles is that they emerge from seemingly empty spacetime itself. This means that all electromagnetic energy primarily comes from spacetime. Using this view, the possibility arises to describe the function of an electromagnetic system in a different way. What we cannot see with our eyes is that there exists a permanently ongoing energetic exchange between the electric system and spacetime. Following this idea, every electromagnetic system is an energetically open system that permanently receives energy from spacetime and permanently gives back to spacetime the same amount of energy. Since the absorption and radiation of energy towards spacetime is balanced, We do not see a gain or loss of energy, and that's why electromagnetic systems behave like closed systems. The first law of thermodynamics, the conservation of energy, shows this situation. An idea a few scientists have come up with is that it should be possible to build an electromagnetic system in such a way that it behaves like an energetically open system. And as is known with open systems, they can generate more energy at the output as was input before by the operator. The missing energy comes from the environment and, in our case, from space-time. My first working attempt for an experimental prototype to extract energy from the quantum vacuum is the crystal cell. The crystal cell is a battery-like device that permanently puts out electric energy. The construction of the crystal cell is not related to a conventional battery. It is rather something that could be called a self-charging capacitor. The crystal cell consists of two diodes that direct electrons into one direction only. Between the diodes is a solid silicate material. In that moment, when an electron arrives from the external circuit at the plus pole diode, it jumps over the diode barrier into the silicate. Likewise, if an electron arrives at the other diode, it jumps over the diode barrier to the minus pole electrode. The remaining question is, how do we create a permanently ongoing charge separation within the polycrystalline silicate material? Quantum fluctuations create small vibrations on atoms. Upon single atoms, these vibrations are usually so small that they can be ignored in relation with the conservation of energy. But what happens if we can trigger these quantum fluctuations in such a way that the fluctuations upon many atoms do at the same time the same thing? These coherent quantum fluctuations would then create significant energetic effects that can be used to create a visible charge separation which leads to a steady electric current. So in a way, the crystal cell is related to a solar cell. Instead of sunlight, we use coherent quantum fluctuations to generate electric energy permanently and emission-free. The crystal cell, which I have here, is an experimental prototype. If the crystal cell is supposed to work as the working hypothesis predicts, then we would expect individual characteristics. Measurements have shown that the crystal cell shows such characteristics, and that is the reason why I believe that the crystal cell extracts energy from the quantum vacuum. Such a single crystal cell has an ambient voltage of 1.5 volts and is able to generate a power output of about 3 milliwatts. Crystal cells that were manufactured in 1999 are still under permanent load, and looking at the generated energy over that time, they can compete with today's lithium-ion batteries. If you want to participate in the crystal cell research and share the measurement data publicly, you are welcome to do so. Please contact us via the below websites. Thank you for watching. I'm Marcus Reid.
Quantum Power. QuantumPower.cc is our Seattle lab. QuantumPowerMunich.de is the Munich, Germany lab.
We developed Quantum Power in Seattle approximately 9 months ago, Rolland and I being the founders, to do product development and support Marcus in his laboratory, which is also called Quantum Power in Munich.
And so, all right, so this is two different models of our energetic world, Maxwellian and our quantum electrodynamics theory. And the first one, you have Maxwell showing the input and the output, being a direct conversion. Very simply, quantum electrodynamics says there's another step in there that the input first informs space-times, virtual particle alignment process, and then the local space-time will actually be what's energizing the output. And so there's an extra step in there, and that's what that particular step is where Marcus has focused on understanding and how and why this works into coming to this.
Marcus is a self-taught researcher, so he's not a big fan of theories and principles that were developed in the 19th century. So he'd prefer to apply new quantum electrodynamic theory to try and explain some of the phenomenon that we see in standard electrical circuitry. And that's what he's doing here. He's, rather than just take a direct relationship between the input and output and see it as a symmetrical system, he's applying quantum electrodynamic theory to include time-space as a carrier medium and see what happens in reality with virtual particle interactions between the input and output, and thus making it an asymmetrical system through the process.
And studying with Thomas Bearden, and of course also having an affinity with the Casimir effect and knowing that small cavities can cause certain resonance, he intuitively has come up with how to make these crystal cells. He's got no traditional training in physics or mathematics or chemistry or anything like that. It's been quite interesting replicating his processes.
In the universe are enormous amounts of energy. In connection with a mass, energy becomes visible. The energy, for example, from an electron, does not primarily originate from the electron itself, but from the quantum vacuum or space-time. The electron is like a channel which integrates energy from the quantum vacuum and converts it into another form of energy, for example, an electric field. The phenomenon which enables this energy conversion process is a broken symmetry. In electric systems, electrons and electric fields are of basic relevance. For this reason, broken symmetries play a fundamental role within every electric circuit. Matter and space-time are phenomena which have a close relationship. Since matter tells space-time how to curve, and space-time tells matter how to move, it is obvious that so-called material things are rather a condition of space-time instead of phenomena which are disconnected from each other. In modern physics, not only a so-called force field in space is considered as a function of the quantum vacuum, but also the composition of an atom merely consists of quantum fluctuations. Matter is not an isolated thing, but a quality of space-time itself. If space-time determines how an atom will move, then space-time must contain a form of energy. A known method to extract energy from seemingly empty space-time is the Casimir effect. The Casimir experiment consists of two smooth plates which are positioned close to each other. Just before they touch, an attracting force emerges. The force occurs due to a difference of the quantum vacuum energy densities between and around the plates. In the absence of atoms and fields, the geometry of space-time is nearly perfectly symmetrical. If there are two plates in space-time, the plates will break the symmetry in a small way. The broken symmetry will integrate a part of the energy from the quantum vacuum into our observable reality. One possibility to extract more energy from the quantum vacuum, as by the Casimir effect, is to break the symmetry by active means. Such a forced asymmetry is a common electric field. Out of the quantum vacuum, virtual photons emerge permanently, and shortly after they disappear again into that domain. Virtual photons disintegrate into virtual particle pairs. One partner of the virtual particle pair has a positive, the other partner a negative charge. The orientation of emerging virtual particle pairs is, in the absence of an electric charge, an unordered process. But the virtual particle pairs can be aligned or polarized. In the presence of an electric charge, for example an electron, virtual particle pairs will be polarized. So the electric field is an ongoing polarization of locally emerging virtual particle pairs or virtual photons progressing at light speed. Due to their very short life, virtual photons cannot move through space-time. All that moves through space-time is a polarization. Since virtual photons emerge locally from the quantum vacuum, the energy for a force on the electron comes from the local quantum vacuum as well. If a form of energy, for example an electric field, generates a force and acceleration onto an electron, then this energy will be newly generated at each point within the electron. So all that moves through space-time is a quality of information, which then initiates the quantum vacuum to generate a force and acceleration exactly where the electron currently is. An electric charge, such as a surrounding electric field, is also considered as a broken symmetry of the quantum vacuum. The asymmetry in space, which exists around electric charges, is what we call space asymmetry. An electric charge has been named vacuum asymmetry. Using this view, it is possible to define what force and energy are. A static force acts on two or several source charges if a space asymmetry exists which is not changed at that very moment. The potential flow will constantly be newly generated in time. That is why a dynamic potential flow is the cause of the electrostatic force. Work is done when the space asymmetry between two or more source charges changes at that very moment. For example, when electrons move away from each other. When changing the space asymmetry is only shifted, compressed, or stretched. The density of all space asymmetries is in relation to energy symmetric systems conserved. The flow of an electric potential is a direct pre-stage or a raw material for an observable energy form.
So, all right, Mark, I'm going to ask you some questions here. So, which role does broken symmetries play in electromagnetic systems?
Well, obviously from the film there, we can see that they play a fundamental and basic role because the electromagnetic field in space-time can be seen as the broken symmetry. And this is the virtual particle restructuring process, or an energetic pressure differential in space-time.
So what has space-time energy to do with electricity?
Well, the electromagnetic field is made up of virtual particle restructuring process in this view, and the virtual particles emerge from seemingly empty space-time itself. And that's why space-time has been seen as the primary energy carrying medium for every single interaction.
I mean, every interaction, like even fire?
Even fire.
Okay.
Yeah.
How is a force assigned?
Well, the force is created by the permanently and newly created alignment of the virtual particles that appear locally at the said charge. Therefore, a static force includes the hidden flow of virtual energy.
So what is the input energy used for? What does it do?
Well, the input acts as an initiator of the causality chain or the potential flow, and that enables later on in the extraction of the energy at the output. Or you could say at the input we pay an observable energy to buy a potential flow or a broken symmetry of space-time.
So essentially, we're just trying to break that symmetry, right?
Mhm.
We're kind of trying to create a pressure difference.
And you pay for that at the input with the observable energy.
Right, okay. Where does the energy from the output come from?
Well, that comes from local space-time at the output, which is occupied by the receiving charge and not from the input.
Interesting. Why are the observable energies conserved?
Well, that's due to the balanced distribution or self-symmetrization mechanism of the back and forth running of potential flows.
Okay. And what is energy?
Well, from Marcus's point of view, it's an asymmetry conversion process. And anybody who's interested in looking deeper into the principle, Marcus's first book, Virtual Particles in Electromagnetism, is available on the website for electronic book download. So we'd strongly encourage you to have a look at that.
Definitely, you know, it's very readable. Okay, so here we go.
So on the next slide, we've got a quote here from a Nobel Prize winner back in 1998, if I can pronounce his name, Ilya Prigogine.
Yeah, Prigogine. He says, according to relativity, events that are simultaneous but occurring at different locations to one observer may not be simultaneous to another. Hence, the simultaneous disappearance and appearance of energy as seen by one observer will not be simultaneous for all. For some observers, energy would have disappeared at one location first, and only sometime later would it reappear at the other location, thus violating the law of conservation of energy during the time interval separating the two events.
So it can be said that the energy used in every electrical, mechanical, or other process, even fire, the work is actually performed and always comes from the quantum vacuum.
But these systems are self-symmetrizing, so that's where the law of conservation comes from when they observe that.
Let's go into the cell construct.
Oh yeah, okay. So this is a basic construction of the crystal cell and how Marcus theorized it would work, and then built it, and it seemed to work. And see the construction there on the. Here we go. In the center here, this is the little nano caves and nano tunnels within the aluminosilicate that traps the water molecules, and you've got the aluminum and then a diode effect, and then the copper and the diode as well. And then of course you have the flow, and it lights up the light bulb. And so basically you've got these self-sustained water molecule oscillations, which then when you have a water molecule that oscillates, obviously that creates an electromagnetic field. And in the presence of a standing electromagnetic field, the quantum dots which form within here they actually form a double quantum dot oscillation, which is self-sustaining because of this, and that's what our observation has been, and that's what the hypothesis is at the moment.
And it's important to point out Marcus has taken thousands of hours and many, many experiments to come to the right magnesium perovskite oxide compound to generate the CMR effect, the colossal magnetoresistive effect, which means that the barrier there, we're getting effectively a superconductive tunneling effect for the spin-up electrons, and in the opposite direction it acts as a complete insulator for spin-down electrons, and therefore giving us the current flow. Thank you.
Oops, no, next one.
All right, the crystal cell fraternity has often been dismissed and debunked by writing off the results for as an electrochemical phenomenon. And we can see here the results. We sent a sample off to UCLA, and they performed some X-ray diffraction analysis on that sample, and through that they determined that 17% of it was still inexplicable. It's certainly a quasi-crystalline material, which has led to us having a new relationship with the Research for Quantum Gravity Institute, who actually proposed that sample to UCLA through their relationships.
We just met with them this last week again and shared with them some of our new data from our new experiments, and they're really enthusiastically going to be now analyzing this material that they've already analyzed once, but with much more due diligence and in alignment with their quasi-crystalline theory, unified field theory, that the structure of reality is a quasi-crystalline syntax code.
And they see great correlation between the quasi-crystalline qualities of their work, where they're looking at the E8 polytope studies within their unified field theory mathematics that they're now doing.
Because they basically confirmed that this is a quasi-crystalline substance, so that was quite interesting.
So what we're looking at here is a representation, part of the engine, if you like, to create the effect, is the setup of double quantum dot pairs. And they go into a self-sustaining, self-oscillating mode triggered by the encapsulation of the water molecules within the carbon nanotubes, which we'll show you in a second. So the quantum dot pairs enter into a spin flip oscillation mode, and each of those, as they go through their rotational precession and resonate with each other, they release single electrons, which we're capturing through the CMR effect on the tunneling diode barrier.
Self-adjusting water oscillation. So basically, Institute of Nanoscience and Nanjing University of Aeronautics and Astronautics, they found that in a small cavity, water chains can actually form a self-oscillation.
Part of the compound in here, we have we generate carbon nanotubulets that contain water molecules in a string arrangement. And one of their very interesting characteristics is that they set up a self-sustaining oscillation once they're trapped inside those nanotubulets. And that, for us, acts as a trigger for tripping the quantum dot spin flip oscillations. In fact, we just, last year, Marcus presented a paper in Bulgaria at a water conference, strictly because of the connection between water and the triggering mechanism for generating the free flow of electrons.
Put on by Dr. Gerald Pollack, who we're working with up at University of Washington in Seattle.
And now we're still doing a lot of experiments with the oxide layers. We believe we can increase the tunneling performance, and that's where we're currently at with this level of technology.
Yeah, we've gotten this down to just quite understanding of how the material science is working right now, and so now we're layering things and finding. We've already increased the density about 200 times, but we need to wait and see if it continues over time.
This one, actually, the power density is about 15 milliwatts per kilogram of material. And over the past 4 months, you can see these are significantly smaller. We're now to about 45 milliwatts per kilogram. And it's still going up as we investigate new materials. This graph actually just demonstrates to us a very interesting characteristic that is not a voltage source such as a battery, but actually a constant current source. Even with a varying load and varying output voltage, you can see from the graph here over time, and over varying voltages, we do have a constant current output.
It's an amperage current source. And so, that would be our last slide. And basically, there's many applications that we're currently building this for, and right now we're just going into production. So we're going into mass production of these and figuring out that process so that we can, and figure out how to make them exactly the same every time and all that, so we can understand how to engineer them into applications.
So where are we going with this now? We, in the lab in Germany, we're spending a significant amount of funding on some sophisticated equipment in order to nanoize this technology. We do plan to layer it so that one of the applications, for example, I used to be in the silicon real estate industry in Cambridge in England, and one of the largest problems that we have is the distribution of power around a high-density circuit board. So one of the applications, of course, will be to piggyback a couple of micro layers on top of every single chip so that they become self-powered. That in itself will revolutionize the whole electronics industry. Thinking on top of that for yourselves at a more basic level, probably in about 18 months from now, we will have this in a state where it'll replace your phone battery. You'll never need cables again. Probably 2 years now, we'll have it in your laptops. so you'll never have to plug your laptops in and they'll never run down. Of course, we're looking at Tesla cars, Leaf, Prius, all of these guys. In fact, the whole concept of battery itself is going to be redundant in about 10 years. We hope to replace that because this is, when you think about it, is going to lead to a point of source power generation system. There will no need to be a battery. Battery will be a redundant. No need to store energy. It'll be on demand, anywhere, anytime. And we believe this technology will do it. It's truly revolutionary. I hope you can see that.
Yeah, thanks guys. Appreciate you listening.
Thank you.